we're going to talk today about soybean research updates. And the first thing that we want to kind of explore is the idea of a yield gap. So farmers are producing the crop, but the potential of the crop is, of course, a little bit higher. So I'm going to kind of show you first a couple of points where we may have some benefits of higher productivity. So the first thing that I did here is looking at the various research centers over the years, and I put here the dots of the yield obtained in their soybean research plots. And if you are looking here at the graphs, you can see that there are several graphs in several locations. And basically, if we look at the formula, we can conclude how much yield gain there has been over time. So the interesting thing is that when we go back to 84 and you look at, for instance, at Langdon, the obtained yield was close to 25 bushels. However, in 21, it was 61 bushels. So if you look at the annual gain in the Langdon area, it was 1 bushel per year. And then in Carrington, 0.8, Central 0.7, and the southern region of North Dakota, 0.6. So if you look at the yield level over those years, we see that in those research plots over all those years, the average yield was between 38 and 46 bushel. So keep that in mind as we go into our discussion. Now, talking about the highest yield potential, that will be, of course, obtained when you have good genetics, but you also have enough available moisture to get the crop growing. So this is under irrigation. So here are yields at the Oaks Irrigation Center in bushel per acre from 2007 to 2022, just this year. And then again, we see the formula here, and the formula says that per year, we can expect that there was an increase of about 0.7 bushels per acre increase. So that is, again, in line what we see the increase, but the yield level obtained is right in that 70 bushel. So in other words, in North Dakota, we can obtain in our trial plots under ideal conditions with irrigation, that's 70 bushel. Now, if we compare all this with what is obtained with the farmer level, and we're talking about that yield gap, what have we obtained at research site and what have farmers obtained? And here I'm looking at 1940 all the way to the last year. This is actually an estimate for 2022. And we again can put a trend line in this data set. And if you look at the formula, you can see that there is an 0.3 bushel increase yield per year. So I've shown you that in the research centers, we have made more progress per year, like 0.6 to 0.7 bushels, whereas farmer yields have increased by 0.3 bushels. Now, if we look at this graph, of course, you can see the dots are higher and lower depending on the weather. So this is a drought year last year. This year, 2022, was right on trend line. So if you predict for 2023, our first predictive value would be an extension of the trend line plus about 0.3 for this coming year. So that is the yield that has been obtained on farm. But we can increase that yield by working at several things that are management related in farming so that we can close that yield gap and get closer to the yields that are obtained at some of our research plots. That is what today's message is about. We are going to give you some ideas or where management can increase in order to increase the yields. So one of the important things is the variety selection. And we every year put together the variety data for NDSU on the variety trials results. So the easiest way to obtain this information is to Google and go to NDSU Variety Trials. When you come up with this particular site, on the left you see the various crop. I clicked on soybean, and we have here on the right-hand side the results that are from the past year. If you click on there, you will get the booklet of the 22 variety trials. So the variety trial booklets are available. The easiest way to find it is to Google NDSU Variety Trials, get to the landing page, and then go to soybeans. Now, we also have another newer tool available, and that is a selection tool, and that is available at vt.ag.ndsu.edu. And in this case, we approach it as slightly different. So here is this landing site, and on this landing site, you will find each individual station. Now, you can select either a county, you can select a location, and you can even use a zip code and a radius and find the data that is generated for you on soybean. So I'm just going to show you one quick example of what data is available, and I'm selecting here Mandan. In the Mandan location, this is what you will find on the screen. You will find the variety, plant height, oil content, and of course the yield. The interesting thing about this particular tool is that you can click any of these top bars, for instance yield, and it goes from highest to lowest or lowest to highest. You can also do it alphabetically, the variety, or you can select it by the brand that you are most interested in. Not only can you look just at a table format, but it is also possible to kind of do it in a graphical format. So here what I did, I selected 2 NDSU varieties at the Mandan site, and then I said I want to know the plant height, the oil content, the seed protein, test weight, and yield, and compare the two. The same can be applied to any of the varieties that are included in this particular data set. Now I'm moving to the next topic that is of great importance, and that is when we are thinking about our growing region, we have many areas where we have issues with iron chlorosis. Here I'm just giving you the scale that NDSU is using. Every year, all the varieties that are entered in the NDSU trial are tested. So if you can see, 1 is completely the green plant. And if you increase the score, you can see there is more iron chlorosis all the way to score 5. So what I did is I looked at the 240 tested varieties at NDSU. They are on the bottom. And I have the IDC rating, where again 1 is green and 5 is dead plant material. And this is the scores of all the varieties in this trial. If we look at the mean of this particular trial, the mean was 3.5. So if you look here, anything that was the mean was 3.5. And just to kind of get it into your mind what is 3.5, here is what the plants look like. Whenever we have plants that have severe iron chlorosis, we see typically a yield reduction. It takes the plant a lot of time to recover, and we have given up the ability of the plant to use the sunlight properly for photosynthesis, and yields tend to be lower. So my take-home message of this is it is critical to look at IDC scores. If you have a field where you expect some IDC issues, I would suggest that you are selecting a variety that has a good tolerance to IDC. There is nothing that is completely tolerant to IDC. We have some selection potential. So I suggest that if you can, select a variety that is most tolerant to IDC. Now, to show you what the effect is on the yield of IDC, I'm taking some data that was generated this year in Grand Forks. And the IDC score is on the bottom. Again, 1 is green and 3 is looking at the plant that has a pretty good IDC symptoms. On the Y, I have the yield in bushels of all those varieties. And of course, there is a kind of a trend line here that you can see that the more IDC, the lower the yield. And if we look here at this formula, it shows that for 1 point difference, so if you go from 1.5 to 2.5, you probably have a yield reduction of about 7 bushel. So a severe reduction in yield potential. Another trial that I did this year is looking at a scoring of a little bit lower. This was at Fargo. And again, you can see the yield went pretty much down as the IDC scores increased. And here, actually, we gave up quite a bit more yield. The take-home message is that if you have IDC, you most likely are giving up some yield potential. Therefore, it is critical that you get a variety that has the best IDC tolerance. Now I'm looking at the next thing of interest, and that is the maturity selection of varieties. What I did here is I looked at 63 varieties that were tested this year in southern locations in North Dakota. The maturity rating was provided by the company, and here on the left we see the maturity date. The maturity date is actually observed in the field by researchers when the 95% of the pods are the mature color. So a couple of things I want to point out here. For instance, with the 0.8 maturity, there were 5 varieties entered with a company given 0.8, but they differed in maturity from the 18th of September all the way to the 25th of September. So varieties named by companies and given a maturity rating does not necessarily mean that they all will mature at the same date. So therefore, it is advisable to kind of pay attention in the tables from NDSU. What is the maturity date? And compare varieties based on maturity date, which is a bit more accurate than just the maturity rating. However, it gives us an indication. So the second thing that I would like to point out is that there is a relationship that typically when we have later maturing, we expect indeed that the date of maturity is later, and that is true in most cases. So talking about maturity in a large study that I have done a couple of years ago, we looked at maturity group on the bottom here, the X, and the bushels per acre, and looked at the yield potential. So as you can see, as the maturity increased, so did also the yield. So there is a relationship, and that shows here that approximately with an 0.10 maturity increase, you could pick up about 0.7 bushel in yield. So that is going from an 0.5 going to a 0.6 would anticipate an 0.7 bushel per acre. Now to see if that is actually holding truth in our region, I looked at the 2022 variety data from the southern location, the same data that I showed with the maturity. Now I'm looking not only at the maturity, but also at the yield. So here we again get a kind of a relationship. And in this case, it shows that there is about an 0.7 bushel increase with an 0.1 increase in yield, which is what we also found in the major study. So this is not an absolute number. It will vary a little bit, but it gives you at least a ballpark figure. So the take-home message is that if you can select a maturity rating for the appropriate area, you can get a little bit high yield with the later maturing. However, it is critical that a variety is selected that matures before the first frost. So I'm not advocating going wild and selecting a maturity that is 0.3 of a point higher or 0.4 of a point higher than normal. That would be giving some issues with frost at the end of the season. So the next thing that is of great interest to many growers is incorporating various biological seed treatments. There is a lot of buzz about can we increase yields with biologicals. We know that if you have never grown soybeans, it is critical that you use the right bacteria. But in this case, we are in a normal soybean rotation. And the idea is, can we still improve the yield with additional products? So these are all biological treatments. And this is a national study that I'm involved in. It is probably done in about 25 to 40 locations in Minnesota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, all the way to the Carolinas. So what we did is we selected microorganisms that are common in or that are in certain seed treatments. So all of these are seed treatments, and we applied those ones before planting, and we do have one control where no seed treatment, that is no biological treatment. It was treated with fungicide and insecticide treatment like most farmers would do. So one of the interesting one that is a lot of buzz is about is the Aspergillus, and that one is a nitrogen fixing bacteria, and there is some buzz about this one also in the grains. So we try to say, oh, if there is maybe some positive in grain crops, some scientific papers have indicated that for corn and even for wheat that there might be some benefit. So we tried it also in soybean. So the first results, and of course we are going to repeat this one, and I'm going to also give the data for many other locations as we collect this data. But this is only from this year. Actually, it is 22. So here is the yield levels, and you can see here that the control is in green. The red is the below the control. The green is higher than the control, but in all reality, there was no significant difference. The variability was so much. So in other words, we have tried all these products in one location 1 year. We will repeat this one and give you more of an idea. So currently, there is not one product that sticks out as that it will increase the yield. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about a previous study that we did. We were looking at the Aspergillus with also a nitrogen application of 0. We had some application rates on the bottom of 56, 30, and 112 kilo, and then we looked at the yield. So if you look here at the yield, numerically there is a yield that is not statistical. That means that yes, you could put nitrogen down, but it would not give you any increase than the 0. Therefore, we stand with our recommendations, and Dave will talk about that later. But the reason that I'm talking about it here is to compare the 0 and a higher rate. And now I'm going to look at one factor that might be of interest to all of you, and that is looking at the nodules. So the theory says that if you have abundance of nitrogen, you will have fewer nodules. So what we do here is we are looking at the control, that is 0N, and we look at the 100 pounds, and we counted many plants within a replicated study. This was done by a graduate student, so he obtained from every replicate about 3 feet of plants, and we counted all the nodules. So here we see the control, the number of nodules, large, the medium, and the small. So you can see that the 100 pounds had fewer large, fewer medium, and fewer small. However, if you are thinking about each size of the nodule, it is kind of like a sphere. So what we did here is we looked at the 1 millimeter nodule. Is the volume is about an 0.5 cubic millimeter, whereas if you 4 millimeter diameter, you have a bigger volume. You have about 33 cubic millimeters. So if you look at those two together, now we're just looking at the total volume on the control versus the 100 pound, and we can see that the total volume of the nodules is 60% of the control. So there seemed to be a reduction of number as well as size when you apply nitrogen. So we still have the recommendation, no nitrogen application. So we just are kind of focusing on the natural nodulation. So the other factor that we were looking at is there a relationship between the number or the volume of the nodules and the yield? So here you can see that we have various observations. The observations in pink here were based on the 120 pounds of kilogram N, and the asperillum is the red, and the 0 is the green. So you can see that there is a relationship. As the total volume of the nodules increased, we saw an increase in the nodules. So it is important to have nodulation, especially in the western part of the state. We need to make sure that we do have nodules available in our soybean fields. The next topic I want to talk about is the fungicide application. There has been a lot of buzz also about, oh, can we increase the soybean application just by applying, not asking ourselves if there is disease. Later today, we will talk a bit more about soybean disease. If there is a disease, fungicide, of course, do very well. But in case there is no disease, what is the effect? So here is some data available from Grand Forks from this particular year. And this one is arranged by variety, and there is no topsin, that is the fungicide, and the red bar is topsin. So as you can see, it kind of goes all over the board, but many times, you know, one is a little higher than the other. The end is that if you total it up, that the no topsin was actually a little bit numerically higher, but there was no significance in yield. So in other words, across this trial, if you would have applied fungicide or no fungicide, the yield would have been the same. So putting that kind of in perspective, I combined here trials, 91 comparisons all the way from 2004 to including this last year. And the way to read this one is each dot is one comparison between without fungicide and with fungicide. So let's take this one. There is a number, this dot here as a fungicide application, and then the fungicide. So what I did here, the black line is when it is equal. Anything that is in this side of the bar means that if you used without fungicide, your yield was higher than if you used fungicide. On the top is when you use the fungicide, the yield was higher than without fungicide. As you can see, there is a large scattering, and sometimes actually the yields numerically were lower, sometimes they were higher. So all this data together, and they were all statistically analyzed, shows that in 8 out of the 92 trials, there was a significant increase in yield, which is 8.7% of the time. So it is not quite sure if there is going to be an increase or not. The next topic I would like to talk about is water management. As you know, in our region, we sometimes have a dry year, and sometimes we have wet conditions, either in the beginning of the season or at the end of the season. What I've done over the years is looking at a plot near Fargo. The airport is indicated in the red box. The research area is just kind of in that pink or in that purple box. The way it looks is we have a site with has 8 blocks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And within each block, we have 2 crops growing for the rotation, as you can see, soybeans, and in this case, wheat. So water management is done in this particular via control boxes. And as you can see, this area on the top picture is where water is removed, and on the bottom picture is where water is not removed. So I'm comparing the tile units where the tile is running if there is excess moisture, and where the tile was closed in order to mimic no tile drainage. So this is the tile unit removing, and the boxes are indicated. So for the past year, we looked at the water table. So this is the water table in 2022. So the tile pipe is about 3 feet below the surface, and the water table the whole year between the tile and the non-tile, basically in both cases below the tile, and it was running below the tile line, and we did not have any of the tile running. So I'm going to just give you the total number. Over 35 trials, we saw an increase in yields. It depends on the year. And if you graphically look at for all the trials, and then no yield is red, and green is the yield with tile. Obviously, tile does not work every year as good, depending on the outflow, but overall, tile management, working with the ground, will give you an increase in yield.